Good evening. Peter Spencer could easily be any one of us. A hard-working Aussie now embroiled in a life and death fight to save his home and his livelihood. He doesn't want sympathy, he just wants a fair go. Now on day 46 of a hunger strike, his family has grave concerns for his health and want him to give up his tower protest. Before he does that, he wants a meeting with Kevin Rudd. But as James Thomas found out, the Prime Minister apparently has more pressing matters to deal with than a farmer in his backyard.
The first 2 nights I was -4. But the rain and the wind and the swaying all at once, it just whips you about like you're in a mix master. I just keep going, I just keep going, I just keep going. They've got the wrong person if they think I'll walk away.
As a part of Australia's commitment to protect native vegetation and to reduce carbon emissions under the Kyoto Protocol, Peter and thousands of farmers like him across the country have been subjected to a government-imposed ban on land clearing. The saved trees are natural carbon sinks worth an estimated $10.8 billion to the government in reduced carbon emissions, should Kevin Rudd's emissions trading scheme go ahead. But here's the rub. The farmers, who can no longer develop this land, have received no compensation.
They're welcome to take my land, but the Constitution says they have to pay.
Not only for him, for us as well. He's fighting for all Australian farmers.
Peter's hunger strike has galvanised the farming community. On Monday, hundreds of supporters gathered at Parliament House and at Peter's property in the Southern Highlands to force the government to meet Peter's demands that farmers be justly compensated for what they describe as the insidious, deceitful theft of their land.
Why should they take without paying?
Like bloody hell. It's not just farmers, it's people that own things. Property rights, freehold. That's what it means.
The only response from the Prime Minister's office is he has said the government does not take any notice of people taking passive protests, as in hunger strikes, or threatening the government. They say we make laws and rules and policy in the national interest, and Peter Spencer needs to come down off there, get medical attention and go to the courts to get remedy.
I have heard that the government's line is that they are not going to be held to ransom by one man's blackmail project, even though they would be sympathetic to your personal situation, that they can't make policy on the basis of one man's stand.
That, yes.
What's your response to that?
Mr. Rudd, how dare you tell me that you'll just carry on breaching the Constitution when I followed every path known? I wrote to you 2 years ago and said, don't throw that excuse up to me 2 years' time. I knew he would try and pass the buck.
The buck will stop with me.
How dare you work outside the Constitution? Wake up to yourself. It's just not on. I'm not here trying to threaten you. I'm trying to get this country back on track.
It has to be understood. Peter Spencer is not an anti-green. He's not anti-environment. He's simply asking for a fair go.
Peter King is Peter Spencer's barrister. Before any hunger strike, the two Peters spent years of fighting for compensation in the courts, to no avail.
Under our Constitution, the notion that we have, which is fundamental to our democracy, is that nobody loses his or her or its land unless it's been paid for.
Peter Spencer is a hot political potato. And the reason being is that both sides of politics have played a role in this legislation which has effectively locked farmers out of their land without compensation.
A world government could actually dictate to a farmer what he has to grow, or maybe to get off of his land entirely and move somewhere else in order to save the environment. Maybe his piece of land will be designated special environmental property under the United Nations. That has already happened with some of our national parks, and I've seen a map that shows that ultimately as much as a third of the United States could be declared as one world property where people wouldn't have any access to it at all.
You're talking about the World Wildlife Fund. Their main objective is, again, to reduce the world's population. Prince Philip, Queen Elizabeth II's husband, he said that. So if I ever came back, reincarnated, I come back as a deadly virus. Well, of course he would, because that's what these people are into. into destroying the world society.
Now that's how one can begin to understand the real goals of the Agenda 21 Sustainable Development UN Global Plan. You see, that plan in its own expression calls for a reduction of the human population by 85%. So you begin to wonder how it is we can survive in this country when our resources are taken and put off limits for our use, whether it's mining resources or timber resources, food resources, etc. If we were to remove half of this country's land mass from productive human use, it's only a matter of time before human population begins to fall. But when we understand that that's the plan of the United Nations, we can begin to put this in a perspective that we need to be putting it in.
Maurice Strong at the UN, is like, he's a very altruistic guy. The guy thinks that, he thinks that he's doing the right thing for the most number of people by advocating that we kill off some of them because there's just too darn many of them.
I believe the whole concept of population control and diminishing the world's population to a place where we can sustain development and bringing it below 1 billion is setting the stage for mass persecution down the road. What if people actually buy into that idea, that much of the world has to be eliminated in order for those who are left to be able to continue to function? You're going to see more wars, more famines, more disease. Some of this intentionally spread to reduce the population of mankind. There's a place I visited called the Georgia Guidestones, where they present the 10 Commandments of the New Age movement in a number of different languages. And one of the commandments calls for the reduction of the population of mankind down to a fraction of what it is right now. So a thinking, intelligent person should be asking, how are they going to achieve that? If that is one of their goals and they're going to work toward that goal, then who are the victims going to be, and how are they going to choose who lives and dies?
I find it hard to believe is because they don't hear it from any other source. You're not going to hear it in the media. You're not going to hear it from the government leaders. You're not going to hear it from the people who, in fact, are creating it. That's the thing. And so they don't realize how far it has gone.
Well, people don't know much about sustainable development because major media is really captured by the same interests that control the banking institutions. Our public information systems have been bought up or have been taken control over by these forces that seek the creation of this one world where human beings become chattel to the ruling elite. And it seems that there have been plenty of people signing up to become slave masters and keep this information undercover.
The loss of freedom is not being imposed on most people in the Western world, not being imposed by force of arms with bayonets, guns, or bombs, but with propaganda.
They've convinced us that what's on the cover of the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, or on CBC Nightly News with Peter Mansbridge, if he's still around or alive, it has to be the truth. And everything else, thus, as a result, is a conspiracy. Because if what I'm saying is the truth, it obviously would be on the front cover of the Toronto Star. Well, it can't, because the media forms part of the world elite.
The purpose of a media in a democracy is to inform the electorate. Their job is to be a watchdog on the government. Well, we have a media that's prostituted itself totally to an agenda. And not only in terms of what it promotes, but in terms of what it hides. The real truth was hidden to the American people, still is. It's an incredibly well-organized propaganda machine.
The empires, they control people, or they manipulate people by making sure they control how people think. And this is exactly what they've done so very, very well. Because again, the greatest hypnotist in the world is this oblong box everyone has in their living room called the television set, which has taught us to eat, to think, to dress, to walk, to talk. We know more about the lives of Britney Spears than we know lives about our spouses.
It's a gradual progression from well-intentioned people who simply want world peace to those that embrace pantheistic concepts, and ultimately a small percentage of those that actually go on to worship Lucifer or Satan.
Evil exists. And evil has been able to coordinate and combine its efforts to bring us to this point.
When you look at how far we've already moved down that path, especially during the last 10 years or so, and when you look at how many top economic planners in the world favor a one-world economic system, and how various figures at the United Nations are calling for one world political system, preferably from their standpoint through an empowerment of the United Nations to the point where it actually becomes a world government. And then on July 6th of 2009, the Pope comes out and openly calls for the creation of a world political authority with teeth to be able to enforce itself. You begin to realize maybe we're closer to all this than we imagined.